The lights were hot, the cameras closer than they needed to be. The studio's air was sharp with silence. On the giant LED screen behind the stage, a bold headline burned into the background: West African Unity, a new dawn. Millions were watching from across the continent. Then Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He wasn't reading from notes. He stood at the microphone like a man dragging a grave behind him. In front of him sat President Bola Tinubu, still, unreadable, hands folded tightly in his lap. Traoré looked him dead in the eye. "I do not come here today as a president. Not as a soldier," he said, voice low but unshaking. "I come here as a brother who could not sleep last night." And then it happened. The screen behind him flickered. A video began to play. No warning. No cue. A little Nigerian girl sat crying beside her mother's dead body. The mother had been shot in her sleep. The room gasped. Someone in the press pool dropped a pen. Tinubu's fingers twitched. "She was 7, Traoré said. "Her name was Fatima. She didn't make the news, but her scream made it to me." His voice cracked. Then silence. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photo. "I carry her image with me. Not to shame you, Mr. President," he said, "but to remind us." Behind him, black and white footage filled the screen. A dirt road, a burning hut, a child's small hand clutching a mother's torn dress. Gasps again. A journalist covered her mouth. One of the moderators looked off stage, panicked. Still, Traoré didn't stop. "She begged a soldier to help her mother," he said. He told her to run. He turned back toward Tinubu, voice softer now. "She never came back." And it was then, right then, that Bola Tinubu broke. He didn't shout. He didn't stand. A single tear slid down his cheek. The most powerful man in Nigeria was frozen, exposed, and finally listening. But Captain Traoré wasn't finished. "Tell me, Mr. President," he said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "When reports say 89 villagers died in Sokoto last week, when children mistake drones for stars, do you sleep?" The room held its breath. And then, just as Traoré's words began to shake the walls, the screen cut to black. Cut. Section continues below. 2 days earlier, no one expected the summit to explode. It was meant to be ceremonial. Another round of smiles, handshakes, declarations that meant little. African heads of state gathered in Lagos under strict protocol. Flags draped everything. Security was tight. Cameras were everywhere. But something had been shifting for months, quietly. In border villages, across dusty marketplaces, whispers moved faster than the news. People were tired. Tired of broken promises. Tired of mass killings buried in silence. Tired of leaders with clean suits and bloodless hands. And then came Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, stubborn, unpolished. President of Burkina Faso by circumstance, but loved by his people by choice. He didn't rise through polished politics. He came from the battlefield. He had buried his own friends. He had eaten with orphans and slept in tents with farmers whose towns had burned. They called him the Quiet Fire. But even he had limits. The moment he saw the video of Fatima, the little girl whose scream never reached the headlines, something in him broke. He made a decision then. He would no longer ask for permission to speak the truth. So when he arrived in Lagos for the summit, he did not come alone. Hidden inside his jacket were 2 folded letters, a photograph, and a worn envelope sent from a grieving mother in Yobe. In his back pocket, a white bead from his own mother's necklace. He didn't ask for clearance to show the video. He didn't care. At the presidential holding room before the summit began, an aide had warned him, "Captain, there will be consequences." Traoré just nodded. "There already have been." As the summit began, cameras panned across the rows of dignitaries. Tinubu sat at the center, surrounded by advisors. His face was stiff, unreadable, practiced. He didn't expect to be called out. Not like this. Not here. Not live. The moderator gave the floor to Captain Traoré, and Traoré walked forward like a soldier going to war. He skipped the greetings, skipped the thank yous. He looked directly at the man whose government had watched too many children die. I speak today because silence is killing us. The entire room stiffened. This wasn't part of the script. Last night, he said, I watched a video I was never meant to see. And then he showed them. All of them. Without permission. Fatima's video. Tinubu blinked but didn't move. She is not a headline, Traoré said. She is our child. Yours. Mine. Africa's. He unfolded her photo slowly, hands trembling slightly. I carry her with me, because if I don't, she disappears. The studio behind him shifted uncomfortably. A technician looked for the signal cut. The moderators whispered into their headsets. But the images kept playing. Burnt classrooms, empty shoes, a child's doll covered in ash. I'm not here for politics, Traoré said, eyes fixed on Tinubu. I'm here because my soul can't rest. That's when he asked the question. Tell me, Bola, do you sleep? And Tinubu couldn't answer, because he couldn't breathe. The blackout shook Africa. Phones buzzed. Radios went silent mid-sentence. Televisions froze, then faded to black. In homes, markets, and hospitals across the continent, viewers stared in disbelief. What happened? Why did they cut it? Was it hacked? But inside the studio, the truth was worse. A voice crackled through the earpiece of a production assistant. Kill the stream. Too emotional. Too political. A technician's hand had hovered over the switch. And with one final glance at a superior nodding behind the glass, he cut the feed. Captain Traoré stood frozen. He hadn't finished speaking. The room was still. Eyes wet, chests tight. People didn't know if they should clap, cry, or run. A young cameraman, who had been quietly filming for the in-house archive, was still rolling. Traoré turned to him and said, If the world won't hear me live, they will hear me offline. The cameraman nodded. No words, just understanding. Then, without warning, Traoré stepped off the stage. The room held its breath. He walked, slow, steady, down the aisle, stopping directly in front of President Bola Tinubu. No podium now, no cameras in his face, just two African leaders inches apart. Mr. President, he said, soft but steady. May I speak to you? Man to man. Tinubu looked up. His face was pale. His fingers clenched around a folded paper. Then finally he nodded. I'm listening. There were no microphones, no handlers, no screens. Traoré placed a hand on Tinubu's shoulder. I know what it feels like to carry pain, he said. But our people, they don't need leaders who carry pain. They need leaders who act through it. Tinubu's lip trembled. You do not understand how hard it is, he said, voice dry. I don't, Traoré replied. But I understand the people's pain. That's who I speak for. He turned and gestured to the black screen behind them. The technician, unsure what to do, reactivated it. A map of Nigeria appeared. Red dots everywhere. Each one a village, a school, a market where lives had been lost in the past 3 months. And they're still counting, Traoré said. Tinubu stared at the screen. His hand twitched. His eyes brimmed again. Do you truly believe it's not too late? He asked. Traoré didn't pause. It's only too late, he said. When we choose comfort over courage. There was no applause. Not yet. Just the sound of one man finally understanding another. Traoré stepped back. Tinubu remained standing. Something had shifted in his face. Less power, more pain. And something more honest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. If I may, he said quietly, I would like to write something. The moderators exchanged confused glances. No one moved to stop him. He borrowed a pen from his aide, unfolded the paper on the podium, and began to write. His hands were shaking. It wasn't a speech. It was more like a letter. When he finished, he looked up at the room. This is not a speech, he said. This is a promise. He read it out loud. Tonight, I will travel to Kaduna. I will meet the mothers. I will walk through the camps. I will not speak as a president. I will listen as a father. And I will not return to Aso Rock until I have answers. Real ones. The words hit the room like lightning. The crowd rose, but slowly. Not with the energy of clapping for a politician, but with the emotion of watching something finally truly crack open. A standing ovation erupted. This time real. And online, even though the broadcast had been cut, the archive footage had leaked. Clips flooded WhatsApp, TikTok, Instagram, X. He said what we all feel. Tinubu cried on live TV. And he needed to. One man spoke. Another man listened. This is the Africa we need. That night, shaky footage from a cheap Android phone swept the continent. President Tinubu arrived in Kaduna. No sirens. No escort of black cars. Just one dark SUV. One aide. A notebook. He walked slowly into the IDP camp, eyes down. Around him were tents made from rice sacks and old wood. People looked up from cooking pots, from makeshift mats, from prayer rugs. Someone whispered, "Is that really him?" He didn't speak. He sat on a wooden bench, surrounded by grieving women. One held a photo of her son. Another clutched a torn school uniform. None of them yelled. They didn't have to. Their silence was louder. Tinubu cried with them, and stayed the night on the floor of their camp. Later, in a quiet corner by a flickering oil lamp, he wrote, "Captain Traoré did not embarrass me. He reminded me I still have a soul." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré watched the footage on a tablet. He said nothing at first. Then he whispered. He went. His advisor nodded. And he listened. But Traoré wasn't finished. The pain of that little girl, Fatima, still burned in his chest. "I'm going to Zamfara," he said. "I need to walk where she died." The room went still. He traveled without announcement. No speech. No media. Just one guide and the weight in his heart. They arrived at dawn. "This is where she fell," the guide said. Traoré stood in silence for 5 full minutes. No movement. Not even blinking. Then he knelt. He reached into his pocket and placed something in the dirt. A white bead from his mother's necklace. "This is for you, Fatima," he whispered. "So even if the world forgets your name, God will remember your face." Behind him, villagers had quietly gathered. No one said a word. One woman placed her baby on the ground and said, "You are the only one who came." Just then, a small girl, no older than 6, stepped out from the crowd. She held a broken pencil in her hand. "Can I still go to school, sir?" she asked. Traoré knelt again. "Yes," he said gently. "You can. And you must." She nodded once. Then she sang an old Hausa lullaby. Her mother's lullaby from before the attacks. One voice became 2, then 20, then the whole village. Singing, crying, healing. And in the center of it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood. No longer just a soldier or president, but a father who had found his lost child. The drone footage was never meant to go viral. It had been taken by a volunteer using a borrowed camera rigged to a kite. The lens shook as it hovered over Zamfara. But what it captured spread like a fire through dry grass. Captain Traoré, standing in the middle of a ruined village. Mothers holding babies. A small girl singing with her eyes closed. People surrounding him, not in protest, not in fear, but in something rare, trust. "This is the Africa we fight for," one caption read. "This is the Africa we must never lose again." Across the continent, something shifted. Young people began filming short messages to their leaders. No scripts, no makeup, just pain and hope. The most powerful one came from a 9-year-old girl in Kano. Her name was Sarda. She stood barefoot on cracked cement, holding a sign made from an old cereal box. In black marker, it read, "Stop the killing. Let us learn." Her voice was small but clear. "If you see us dying, and you stay quiet, maybe you do not love us." She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. But the world listened. That one video reached 9 million views in under 24 hours. When Traoré saw it, he reposted it with a single caption. "You are the voice of a new Africa, and I hear you." And then, for the first time in decades, something unbelievable happened. Presidents across West Africa, Ghana, Senegal, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, released a joint declaration, not a vague diplomatic memo, but a promise, a united pledge to protect African children from war, from hunger, from silence. But Traoré wasn't celebrating. He gathered his team in Ouagadougou and said, "Words are good, but I'm not finished." He opened a map and pointed to several locations across Nigeria. "I will go again," he said, "not to speak, just to listen." The room was quiet. No one questioned him. 2 weeks later, President Tinubu returned to the studio where it all began. But he was different now. He walked in carrying a wooden box, hand-carved by displaced artisans in Borno. His steps were slow but certain. When Captain Traoré entered moments later, the two men embraced. No microphones, no speeches, just two men who had been broken open and now stood beside each other. Tinubu opened the box. Inside was a neatly folded Nigerian flag. Along its edge, stitched in gold thread, was a name, Fatima. He placed it on the table. "She will not be forgotten," he said. Then he stepped up to the podium where Traoré had once stood. "This flag," he said, "will fly in every IDP camp in Nigeria, not just as a banner but as a reminder of a promise, that no child will be left behind again." The room was silent. Then the two leaders stepped forward together, and in one voice they announced, $100 million in emergency relief for families in crisis zones. A new Pan-African Child Safety Pact to be signed by 14 nations, and an education fund named in Fatima's honor. From Abuja to Bamako, from Accra to Lagos, crowds erupted. Churches rang bells. Mosques echoed with whispered prayers. Markets played recordings of Traoré's speech from loudspeakers tied to poles. For the first time in a long time, leadership began to feel like love. And across the continent, people felt it. Not just in headlines, but in hearts. That night, a final event was held in a grand hall in Abuja. It wasn't a summit. It wasn't for television. It was for the people. There were farmers, orphans, teachers, traders, volunteers, refugees, soldiers. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to the microphone once again. The hall was packed, but you could have heard a pin drop. He didn't speak like a politician. He didn't carry notes. He looked straight into the camera, straight into Africa. "The world watched us bleed," he said. "But now, let the world watch us rise." The screen behind him lit up. Fatima's photo, Sarda's video, Tinubu in Kaduna, hugging a grieving mother, children singing in Zamfara. The room erupted in quiet tears, not from sorrow but something else, something like belief. Traoré raised his hand. "We are not powerless," he said. "We are not voiceless. We are the storm that will protect every child with our peace, not our weapons." And in that moment, Africa saw something it had been waiting for. Not kings, not generals, but servants. Servants of the people. As the event closed, people didn't rush for the doors. They stood. Some held hands. Some bowed their heads. A few whispered Fatima's name under their breath. Outside the studio, children drew chalk hearts on the sidewalk. In Kano, Sarda was asleep, curled beside her older sister. In Ouagadougou, Traoré stepped into the night air and looked up at the sky. Somewhere in it, maybe, were the stars Fatima never got to wish upon. And now, they were hers, forever. If you believe in leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré, share this with someone who still believes in humanity, because this is not merely a story. This is a cry, a call, a promise.